Thank you, everyone. This is a really important conversation about economics here in northeast Arnhem Land. So we're going to have this one as a bit of a sit-down. You know, economics and being economic beings can be a really serious kind of conversation, but we thought we would sit back, relax, peel it down. I'm going to take off, and I am going to leave Shannon Finch, who is the Group Executive and Group General Counsel of Westpac, to set the scene of this amazing panel. So can we please welcome Shannon?
Good afternoon. I'd like to pay my respects to the Yolngu people, to their elders past and present. And I have to say, I'm a little overwhelmed by the generosity of the Yolngu people for welcoming us all to this incredibly special place. Westpac is very proud of its long association with Gama, and we've been honoured to support this gathering every year. Every year, it allows us to learn, to deepen our understanding of the most pressing issues. And we come to listen, and because the conversations taking place here are important. And we have a very important conversation coming up. It's a conversation about bringing two worlds together. A world steeped in the complexity of history and which treasures and sustains culture. And a world in which economic opportunity will be unlocked, in which innovation and creativity can thrive, to allow Indigenous communities to fully participate in economic growth in a way that can sustain generations. So it's a big subject. Djawa Yunupingo has reminded us this morning just how fundamental this is. And it's a vision that we want to get behind and to facilitate. So we have some wonderful speakers gathered here today, and they have a thing or two to say about it. We have Professor Peter Yu, Vice President First Nations from the Australian National University. Peter Yu is a Yarrawu man from Broome and has over 40 years of experience in Indigenous development and advocacy. As Vice President First Nations at ANU, he leads initiatives to advance Indigenous education, policy and community engagement. Please welcome Peter Yu. We are also joined by Ian Hamm, Chairman of the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation. Ian, a Yorta man, has extensive experience in government and community sectors, overseeing significant policy reforms. He chairs multiple boards, including the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation and the Community Broadcasting Foundation. Please welcome Ian Hamm. And last but by no means least, we have Djawa Timmy Burarrwanga, founder of Bawaka Tourism. Djawa Timmy Burarrwanga is a Gumatju clan traditional owner, my apologies. And he founded Bawaka Aboriginal Corporation and Lirui Tourism. He is a cultural leader, board member and former advisor on Indigenous constitutional recognition. Please welcome Djawa Timmy Burarrwanga. Now, I'll hand over to our three experts because I've done enough talking and I'm here to listen. So perhaps, could I ask each of you just to give us a brief introduction on your thoughts about how we tackle the gap to viable economic development?
Okay, I'll start. First of all, I want to acknowledge the Yolngu people and thank them again for me coming up here third year in a row now, which is pretty good. Personally, it's really good to get away from Melbourne when it's cold, so there is that. But I'd like to thank them and their elders for the warm welcome they always give us. It re-energises me, so it's really good to come up here. Okay, closing the gap on economic disadvantage. I loathe the term closing the gap, and I loathe the term disadvantage, and I loathe the idea that everything about us is a deficit that is to be fixed, or a problem to be solved, or a gap to be closed. That might work in the social policy space, right? If we talk about justice or health or, I don't know, pick something else that's traditionally social policy. But economies don't work on disadvantage. They don't work on reduction of deficits. Economies work on opportunity, capability and capacity. So that's the first thing I would do in relation to how we think about Aboriginal people in the economy. We are not a series of problems to be fixed or gaps to be closed. We are a people of great capability and capacity. What we need is the opportunity for that capability and capacity to come out. Second thing, what we don't talk about as Aboriginal people, as black fellas, how often we talk about what's good about being Aboriginal, as opposed to how often we talk about what's bad about being Aboriginal. How often do we do that? We don't. We don't talk about what's good about being black. We talk about what's wrong. Yet, if we think about Aboriginal participation in the economy, it shouldn't be what we get from the economy. That's part of the equation. But we should also talk about what do we bring to the economy? What do we value add to the Australian economy overall? What do we contribute to the national economy, to the nation as a whole? That's how you think about economics. I think the other thing we bring to the economy is perhaps a more universal way of thinking about the economy is meant to serve society, not the other way around. Clearly, as the examples that were shown just before, they were about what these businesses are doing for the whole community, not just for the person that owns them, not just for those who are on a wage there, but what they do exponentially for the whole community. Quite frankly, I think the Australian economy could do with a whole rethink about what is the purpose of the economy. Any economists here, by the way? How come there are no economists?
One bloke up the back.
Oh, one up the back. Yes, excellent. Milton Friedman was wrong. Badly wrong, woefully wrong. Excellent. There are economists in the room. But that thing of the economy should be about how do we share wealth amongst the greatest amount of people, not in a Karl Marx kind of way, but how do we get a better distribution? Aboriginal community is built on the very notion that we are a collective. That's who we are socially, that's who we are culturally, that's who we are structurally. If that plays out in the Australian economy, would we not have a better economy all around for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people? That should be the approach. That's my fundamental premise about what Aboriginal people bring to the Australian economy. So we turn away from this thing of almost Australians, and Dean mentioned it, I think it was Dean mentioned in the last session or the session before, only 50% of Australians had an idea of what the referendum might be about. The other 50% didn't care, or just not on their radar. One of the truisms of Australian politics or Australian life, Paul Keating summed it up perfectly. In a two-horse race, always back self-interest because you know it's trying its hardest. So how do we present Aboriginal economic participation in the Australian economy in the interests of all Australians? Because trust me on that, the bulk of Australians will come along because they'll say, oh, what's in it for me? And that will get on board with it. Or make it a lot easier. It won't fix it, but it'll make it a lot easier. I think there are some fundamental shifts, and the Prime Minister, I know Peter wants to talk about this, but that idea of shifting Aboriginal stuff out of just the social policy parts of government and social policy ministers to Treasury, to the Finance Department, getting those economic ministers involved, and not just in a micro-programmatic response. That's just, drives me nuts. In a macroeconomic policy sense, having an economic policy for Aboriginal Australia, urban, regional, rural, remote, all of that, and applying that, that is how you uplift Aboriginal Australia to a point, to get us involved in the economy, because then when you have economic participation and economic wealth, two things happen. One, a lot of your social disadvantage disappears, and two, you get something that you don't have to ask for the indulgence of the Australian people. You have a bit of economic clout to wield, and suddenly that makes a whole bunch of difference. So I'm going to stop there.
Just want to acknowledge someone just passed away, and he was a Reverend Dr. Kundara, and he was also my father-in-law. So I just want to acknowledge. are very great leaders, especially the creating a new economy. You know, my journey it's been a really hard, and to build that opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right across. You know, it's very sad that we're not a subject of a dominant law, and we are not a subject for this country. You know, and it's very sad to change that constitution to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. And it's still very sad to our people, our kids. You know, very sad. And to create a new economy, I was a founder of Little Ilmu Tourism Corporation. And my journey was to the corporate world through the Reconciliation Action Plan and creating that to see a bigger opportunities and corporations in this country. My vision was through the master plan to create 50 a new economy in Arnhem Land. And that is my dream. And it is really hard. If we want to build something that is what to transformations to a life of the Aboriginal people in this country, there could be a dialect to the economy, the way you speak in your way of seeing a new business. There is no dialects. You know, a lot of people talks about economy. To create that economy, it's important we're creating something here. You know, my journey was hard. I have never seen a world. And today, my people wants to get that opportunities to build something. To build that something, we need the dialects. What do you see here today? There's no young people sitting here and listening to our story. That's the thing that we're missing out. That's the thing that is what's happening here. We want to build that education. We want to change that, the education philosophy, so we can all understand each other. You know, the beautiful black woman ran 2000 Olympic. She actually knew grab her 2 flags. And in that moment, there were tears. There was joy and happiness right across the spirit of the common unity, the reconciliation. You know, I work very close with a lot of non-Aboriginal people. They are some CEOs, are great people. And it means how you and I can work together and understand to build that. You know, kids, 90% kids now saying they want to learn Indigenous education. Can they change the curriculum to create something? And one of the economic, especially with the Bawaka Aboriginal Corporation, you know, I've seen life changing, especially I'm a young man 20 years ago. My journey through my business is really hard work. It's not easy. You know, I have a family, culture, language that I don't speak English. I'm trying to learn more English. You know, all those things for us is hard. And maybe, you know, through reconciliation action plans, I see a big opportunities. And that's the reason. And that's what the justice is all about, you know. And the business is more something that I can bring to my people. Thank you.
It's sometimes difficult to comprehend that this excellent deliveries this morning from Djawa and also the Prime Minister to consider this fact that we've never engaged in the conversation that we're having today about an approach that's ever raised this question about what the fiscal relationship between Aboriginal communities and the kind of settler status. I mean, don't you think it's quite extraordinary that we've had in the last 60-odd years, particularly I guess in modern history, in the last 60-odd years of public policy administration, it's largely been, as Ian has described, a deficit approach to the nature of viewing us as not part of the Australian community, as being kind of welfare mendicants subject to the kind of the purse and the public largesse and generosity in our own country which we own. Somewhat strange and ironic, but nevertheless, I think we are, I believe, at the end of the day, are optimistic, and I think we can't be anything but optimistic given the nature of our history, I suppose. But it's purposeful today, I think, to think about what the next stage following the Prime Minister's announcements this morning about his government's commitment to look at this in a comprehensive way and what that might mean. And they always say incrementalism can be the success of you, can be the death of you. Let's hope that waiting over the last 200 years that it might bring us some success, notwithstanding all the failures that we've had to date. But things have changed quite dramatically as well. And while we're primarily talking about the nature of trying to shift and adjust the kind of national policy framework and to look at looking at examining the nature of what are the structural impediments. And we're not very well educated, I think, as a community in terms of understanding, and that's why I think we talk from the point of view, what's government's responsibility? While we need to look at this from an economic lens in the way in which we might contemplate how we now activate the considerable assets that we've been able to accumulate over the last 60 years post the Northern Territory Land Rights Act and various other pieces of state legislation, and of course the 92 Mabo decision and the consequences of the Native Title Act. We have to think about the fact that Aboriginal interests in land nationally is about 60+%, and across Northern Australia is anything plus 80+% upwards. And referring to the Prime Minister's comments about the fact of trying to, with the Future Made in Australia legislation and investment of moving to a global renewable superpower, that most of that is going to happen on Aboriginal land. But I think, and even the issue of closing the gap, and I'm certainly with Ian on that regard, the enormous amount of investment that's been made over the last decade or so for various prime ministers of all colours, embarrassingly getting up in Parliament in February of each year and saying that we really haven't closed the gap, and in fact we're going backwards. And the Productivity Commission made comment the other day in terms of its latest data that in fact some of them are actually going backwards. So I think we know it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work at considerable costs, particularly to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but more so to mainstream Australia, who, you know, most people want to see the right thing being done. Most people want to see that there is improvement in the imprisonment and recidivism levels and the kind of health levels and the dealing with those fundamental things that have challenged us on a daily basis, that perhaps now we can start to look at what it is where we need to move. And structurally is important, I think, because we don't really understand the federation the way that our country is established. This is an important thing to understand, in my view, because we know that most of this money is Commonwealth money that goes towards closing the gap. Very little, if any, state or jurisdictional money goes in, but largely the jurisdictions are the responsible agencies in respect to the program delivery aspects of it. And so the convoluted nature of our federation, I think, is a systemic issue that underpins the nature of the impediments of why we aren't seeing it. And we see it in a whole range of other forms of regulation. But it has a particular effect on Aboriginal people because, of course, the '67 referendum took back the authority from the states for the Commonwealth to take responsibility for that. And over the last 20 or so odd years, we've seen the Commonwealth withdraw and put it back on the states to do it from a political standpoint, but which has a direct effect and impact in the nature of how that investment is rolled out. And Josie Douglas made a very good point about the role and responsibility of community-controlled and community organisations, because we are not involved in the nature of making the kind of determinants for priorities of investment and funding. So we're not involved in the planning and we're not involved in the actual execution and the decisions of what happens. And I think there's enough data around to demonstrate and show that basically where there is direct Aboriginal ownership and participation and in execution, the multiplier effect is so dramatically different in the way that things happen. So there is, and I refer to that purely from the point of view of what the structural reform issues need to take place. But I guess for me, the critical thing here now, and where do we move, of course, we anticipate that the message is very clear from the Prime Minister about working with all of those agencies, and Ian talked about shifting it away from the agencies that might be responsible for the social policy area, but more into the fiscal and economic area. So presumably that means dealing with central agencies, as we are beginning to, with Treasury, Finance, Industry, Science and Resources. Those economic agencies that have a real impact on the ground in the communities, and particularly if you're talking about critical minerals, I suppose, the nature of negotiating those agreements, it should be with those agencies' support that we're actually doing that. So I think, and we're currently, working with those particular agencies to try and scope out what it is we're actually talking about. But fundamentally, I guess the move has to be towards understanding about how we leverage the government's balance sheet to be able to look at, as they do in these special investment vehicles they have for, the housing fund, the infrastructure fund, the NAIF fund, all of these funds that have been established to underwrite the nature of continuing growth and prosperity in the economy. Because not one of those have any particular carve-off recognition for Indigenous equity or other facilities that might enable being able to engage in a productive way. Most of them just have a little clause saying a strategic Indigenous engagement strategy. So it's still within that kind of deficit approach that we need to move away from. So I think the question of mobilising capital, and I'm not an economist, I don't have any background in finance stuff, it's just being observing the reasons why this happens in the mainstream, but somehow we continue to be excluded from it. So it's about how do we do that? How do we, as they say, lower the hurdle rate or the entry level for Aboriginal interests and enterprises to be able to take advantage of that. Notwithstanding, there is some very successful Aboriginal enterprises happening as we speak and have been. The latest dashboard report by Michelle Evans and her team at the Research Centre at Melbourne Uni indicate that Aboriginal interest in the economy is roughly about, up to $60 billion, and there's about 14 or 15,000 Aboriginal businesses that are operating, contributing about over $6 billion in salary. So it is happening, but it is happening very slowly. But so I think that what we need to do is to look also at how do we get greater accountability and transparency in terms of the return of investment the Commonwealth puts into this with the states. And so there needs to be structural change. There needs to be a way that the $4 billion that the Commonwealth's providing for housing in the Northern Territory, there's some way of measurably understanding its effect and impact. And part of that is being able to allow the Aboriginal communities themselves to have the ability to do that and understand that impact. So it's a question about what the shared risk is, I suppose, and through shared responsibility, what the shared benefits could be from moving in this new direction.
There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there to discuss. I might just pick up first on. Thank you. It's a way to throw out the big issues. Just to pick up on one thing that I think both Peter and Ian touched on, and that I think Timmy also reflected on in a different way, which is this idea of that there being a narrative of deficits. And I think the way Timmy reflected it back, it was actually even a narrative by, for instance, the Yolngu people themselves, of how they think about themselves. How do we shift that narrative, and where do you see the responsibility for shifting that narrative? I'd be interested in each of your thoughts.
Well, so Garma's about poking the bear a little bit. So I think one of the things is we as blackfellas ourselves have to start to drive the change of that narrative, because it's easy to talk about what's bad about us, and it's easy because it's what we've always done. First and foremost, we have to be change how we talk about ourselves. That's a different thing, so we need to do that and not let others put us in that box of that's just who we are, that's all that we are. That's actually a primary thing, and push back on it. I mean, I look around here and there's some people I know here, some of the smartest, most capable people I know in doing what they do are here now. And yet, as soon as people find out they're Aboriginal, the brains of those people go straight to lower life expectancy, higher incarceration, so on and so forth. We have to, first of all, start talking about changing that narrative. Second of all, I would probably also, well, not I would probably, second of all, I think we need to start talking about and talking to people who we don't usually talk to. There's I think, a thing of, even in the economic development space, people working with us, but it's still a little bit like, here's our reconciliation action plan and we want to do this and because we're doing good things, as opposed to, we want to work with you because it makes business sense for us to do that. That's just, why don't people do that with us? I mean, it's starting to happen, but it should happen more and more. I think also too, taking up a challenge in some areas, one of the biggest issues for the Aboriginal economy is not what government does, it's what the private sector does or doesn't do. So one of my, I guess, things, one of the biggest things I've seen in Michelle's, as Peter referred to, Michelle Evans' work at Melbourne Uni showed, and others have showed this, access to capital is a handbrake on the growth of the Aboriginal business sector as one part of the economy, right? One of the things that I would really love to see is the banking sector, instead of working as individual banks, whether they be the big four or the secondary level banks or whatever they are, working as individual banks, how do we get them to work as a sector, to get them to think about, to bring all their economic, intellectual power, bring certainly their financial power as a single sector to be able to support the Aboriginal expectation around economic participation, as opposed to individually doing what they do on their own. That's not an addition effect, that's a multiplication effect. I mean, that's huge. I mean, one of the other things I do, I sit on the board of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, right? So one of the things that drives me insane is that I don't know how often I've heard about boards say, we want to have an Aboriginal person on our board. But did you know that the ASX 200, so the top 200 companies in this country, there were 4 Aboriginal people on their boards, right? So even if there's 7 on each board, times 200, that's 1,400 people. There's only 4. It comes out at 0.04%. 0.04. That is 0.1 below the what you have to get to be driving illegally over alcohol, with alcohol in your system. That's 0.05. We're doing 0.04.
I think we might, on that note, having established the breath test, which I think I won't forget now when I look at board composition, I promise you, Ian. Yeah. I would love to, because I'm conscious of time, I would love to hear from Timmy on the importance to the Yolngu people of shifting the narrative, and what's the ask you would like to make of the corporates who are gathered here to hear you? Well,
first thing is, I think very important is to the business talk, or the way that business operated, needs to have a translated. So Yolngu, Aboriginal people, can able to understand that language, you know, through the corporate worlds. And I think that's a very important way for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The transformations, how we can build that, the opportunities, you know, especially the word, you know, because we do have words in English and we do have words with our languages, you know, and we maybe speak 13 or 14 languages, and English maybe could be a 4th language or 14th language. So everything to build that, we have to go through in the hurdles to understand more and more and more, you know, and that's what we really need. I think, you know, if we have a hub here, can be a federal government hub or Northern Territory hub, or we create our own hub, that could be also economically and build that business into where we could understand, you know. Just when you go to China, you know, there's a language. You have to learn how they deal with it, you know. And Australians are like this too. You know, if we need to build our economy, we have to have that. So we got 2 languages to be able to understand that. You know, we do have a bilingual school here, and we are actually working very close with other corporates, you know, especially with the business. You know, there could be a person. When I'm saying my vision and dreams is a 50 business right across in Arnhem land, you know, and tourism is one of the thing, because this tourism is about new beginning of tourism. It's about you and I can learn together. This is the oldest culture in the world, oldest language, you know, here, that has been here for 70,000 years of culture, you know, and Yolngu people were doing this for many years. But there's something that, a gap, you know. We now, there's a lot of people are talking about promises. You know, government talking about promises. You know, what is the justice? We have to believe that what is justice. If we're all Australians, let's build that justice. The spirit of Australia is building that bridge, and economy is the biggest. You know, we have a scar that will never heal, and there is a justice. And justice is talks about right now. Thank you.
And then, Peter, just to close, because we have reached time and there's some important activities to be getting to over at the Bungle grounds. But, Peter, you've mentioned unlocking economic opportunity, and of course, at the moment, a review of the Native Title Act has commenced by the Australian Law Reform Commission. It sits at the heart of so many of the structural issues that you've touched upon that need to be addressed in unlocking the ability to have economic growth thrive in Indigenous communities. Is there an ask that you have of this audience, or a particular issue that we should be keeping in mind as we go into that review of that important legislation?
Well, it's the Law Reform Commission's review on future acts, which is a probably central part of the operations of the Native Title Act and the regulations as to how agreements are negotiated for third parties seeking to get access onto Aboriginal land. Others will talk to you about this whole question of fungibility and in relation to the nature of the tenure that's there. And you know, these are, we always see them as barriers, and there are technical issues, of course, that might need to be addressed down the track, but I don't think that will be something that's going to happen immediately. But I think the main thing, I believe, is the question of in providing the necessary investment and resources to the prescribed body corporates, which is the PBCs. And I understand that's currently being discussed in government about how that might happen. But it's about, you can't have major companies like Rio Tinto or BHP or FMG or others who are seeking to engage with traditional owners in regards to access when those organisations are dealing with PBCs have no real capacity to be able to. Some of them do, where they may have been, you know, particularly in the mining provinces, where they have been able to generate kind of revenue through their agreements. But largely, most of the PBCs are pretty disadvantaged, and I think the level of funding is about $60,000 a year currently at the moment, which couldn't buy you a very good admin assistant in probably the way, you know, wages are scaled today. But so I think it's about making sure, if there's to be a modicum of equity in this very complex environment, they need to make sure that these organisations have the capacity. So we need to, and that's a critical part of the potential success of this. We need to make sure that there is strong support for building better governance capability in our organisations and allowing them to have the ability to negotiate with some form of equity in terms of the new way that agreements are addressed, I believe. And I think, you know, and I must say some of that is happening. I know from my own personal experience, as Kelly Parker said earlier, I chair the Australian Advisory Group to Rio Tinto, post-Jungle Gorge, and I know that there are very serious and very good endeavours and effort by Rio, and I'm presuming that happens in some of the other companies to try and do that, but there's a long way to go. So I think that that's one. As far as the review itself is concerned, it's a question of how do you generate greater efficiency in terms of agreement making, protecting the integrity of the position of traditional owners in respect to the cultural and other social imperatives. I think that that's critically important. I think the other thing is how we look to moving. Oh, sorry, I was just thinking about what was crossing my mind was, ironically, we're sitting here today on Yulnyu country, Gumatj people, and we've also got the appeal to the Gumatj case that was led by the late Mr. Yunupingu in the federal court, in the High Court happening at the moment. And there is one thing that worries me, and it might be a technical legal thing and a constitutional issue, and I'm not a lawyer, so I hope I can explain this in simple terms. But part of that appeal is around the question of the equated value of native title to fee simple title. on the basis that the compensatory nature of what is being sought for, the damages done, should not equate to normal fee simple title, which is pointing out the ongoing challenge that we have to try and reason with why that might be the case. But you probably need to get a lawyer to explain to you properly, but that's what I understand it from my simple mind, not being a lawyer.
That may be a conversation we have to take up around the fire pit this evening.
Yeah.
Can I ask you all to thank our speakers today?
And thank you also to Shannon Finch for facilitating. And I do have a thing for you, a little moment for you to ponder on. 14 languages, Timmy. Is that how many you speak? 14 languages? 14 languages. And I've written down here, who should we really be underestimating, Timmy? Okay? That's a question, because I'm pretty confident not many of us are speaking 14 languages out there. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the bungal. We've got to get to it. Thank you.